My name is Dale Alexander, and I'm a press officer for the Bank of Canada. I will be moderating this press conference. Governor Carney will be pleased to take your questions for 20 minutes. Governor Carney is meeting with union leaders afterwards. We do need to keep it to 20 minutes, so we would ask for your cooperation in stating your name and affiliation, and also asking your question with one quick follow-up to make sure we have time for everyone. We are webcasting this press conference as well, so please, again, state your name and affiliation. If you raise your hand, my colleague will be passing around a microphone on the floor. The Governor will be happy to answer questions in both official languages. Avant de poser une question, veuillez vous identifier. Je vous demanderai également d'utiliser le micro sans fil. Libre à vous de poser vos questions dans la langue officielle de votre choix. Governor Carney is now ready to take your questions.
Yeah, the special factor reference really relates to the third quarter. Energy, there's some energy platform maintenance. The schedules have shifted, which will have a bit of effect on the production side of GDP, obviously, which will bring some weakness. I mean, what we also need to look at, obviously, is as we always do when we sit down in September, is recent data more broadly, and look through the sum of that towards where we see the underlying momentum. And what I was trying to do with that phrase was just point to where is the underlying momentum in the economy, which headline will be a little softer in Q3, and we need to form a view on where we're going there.
On the international scene, you'd mentioned earlier this year that there are a lot of troubling reports about the LIBOR rate.
Yeah.
I know you're meeting with international policymakers next month. Have you seen any new evidence or new developments on LIBOR and where it goes from here?
Well, in terms of evidence and the enforcement procedures that are underway, no. That's not, as you know, directly in either responsibility of the Bank of Canada or the Financial Stability Board. But in terms of where to next on LIBOR and similar reference rates, there are a number of national processes that have been set up. The most prominent, the Wheatley review in the UK is one example. There will need to be international coordination of these. These are rates that ultimately are important for a huge swath of the global financial system, and so we will do our best both through the governors of the Economic Cooperation Council, which is headed by Mervyn King, those meetings, but through the FSB, which obviously brings together the principal regulators as well as the central banks and the treasuries, to make sure there's that coordination, so that as the world transitions to a better version of reference rates, that there is buy-in globally, both in the public and obviously very importantly the private sector.
Amanda Lang, CBC News. You referenced the $50 billion gap from the housing market. Are you confident that business investment will fill that gap?
Well, what we see, and just to be clear, that's a calculation in terms of the net financial deficit of households. So where's the savings rate, which is calculated just on a consumption basis, but then housing investment, which brings it into a gap. And as I think we've talked about before, there's for 4 decades up until the last 10 years, Canadian households ran a surplus there. Now they've been running this deficit. So the question is, if you start to move back into surplus, as we would expect over time, as housing activity, housing investment starts to move down from a record level of GDP, are we confident? Business investment alone, it will not be sufficient. Net exports will have to pick up as well. Obviously, there's a link between the two, and it also depends, importantly, on how that gap is closed. How much of that is closed through disposable income growth, and how much is adjusting savings for a given level. So the point, which I didn't elaborate in the speech, so it's a good question. The point is that it's a big enough gap that we're going to need all of those elements to come together to have a smoother path, and that's one of the challenges for our economy. I mean, without full disclosure, without question.
And your message was that we do need to get to those emerging markets. It was a message for labor, but also for business. Do you have any theories about why Canadian business hasn't been more proactive in getting to emerging markets?
Well, I mean, I think the most obvious is that we had a pretty good strategy up until the U.S. The trajectory of the U.S. economy changed. I mean, maybe a little over. I mean, in retrospect, of course, over-reliant on the United States. But when the United States, it's still the largest economy, but was also one of the most dynamic economies in addition to being the largest. And when we were well integrated with it, there was that natural focus, and so the shift was probably delayed. Now it becomes much more of a priority. I think, and one of the messages I was trying to give is let's look at that as an opportunity. I mean, we can lament that we're not there, but on the other hand, it's an unexploited opportunity for Canadian business and by extension for Canadian labor, and that's a good thing. Others already have exploited that, and they're in a much more difficult position.
Greg Keenan from the Globe and Mail. Included in the book that the CAW just gave you is a study showing that Canadian companies, non-financial companies, are sitting on about $500 billion worth of cash. I wonder if there's anything the bank could or should be doing to try to encourage companies to do something more productive with that cash, since rates don't seem to be working that well. Well,
I mean, you mentioned one element of it, which is rates. I mean, this is dead money, and shareholders have a role to play here, that if the companies can't determine what to do with a very large cash pile, give it back to the shareholders and they'll figure out what to do with it. And that dynamic will start. That's the first point. The second point, what we can also do is that some of that cash is precautionary because there's concerns about, obviously, events in Europe, issues in the global financial system, and could there be another dramatic tightening of financial conditions? So our responsibility across the bank, the supervisor, OSFI, the federal government in its very important role is to ensure that the Canadian financial system is resilient to those type of shocks. Obviously, the institutions have a responsibility, and the point we make to Canadian business is having the best financial system in the world is only really a value if it's also there in the tough times. We expect it to be there if there are tough times. And so the level of caution could be viewed as excessive. Their job's to put money to work, and if they can't think of what to do with it, they should give it back to their shareholders.
Has the bank done any kind of assessment of the impact that a PQ victory on September 4th might have on the dollar?
No.
Tony Keller from BNN. Mr. Carney, over the last few weeks, we've seen economic data that suggests to many people the Canadian economy is slowing down a little bit. The lower retail sales numbers today, lower wholesale number. Yesterday, a CPI number that came in below expectation. 2 weeks ago, unemployment ticked up, employment ticked down. And given all of this, should Canadians be concerned that the economy is slowing down?
The recent data has been soft, and we're tracking. This is an economy that starts from a position of being, in our estimation, an output gap of about 0.5%, so pretty close to production potential. It's not an exact science estimating output gaps, as you know, but pretty close to production potential. Still some slack in the labor market, as we talked about in that room. So we start from that position, and I think it's in that context that we need to look at it. The other context in which we need to look at it is a pretty marked and a more marked deceleration of global activity over the same course of time. We all know what's going on in Europe, but Chinese activity is coming in basically on where we thought it would, but at the low end of expectations. Elsewhere, U.S. slightly softer. The sum of that, it's not surprising in some respects that our data is a little softer. It bears watching without question. This is from a message to Canadians. It's this is not a normal recovery and expansion. It's not a normal cycle. We've got fundamental challenges. Both of the questions, the previous question hit on a couple of those challenges that we have to face, and this is going to be it's going to be a long slog. We're in a better position than virtually any other advanced economy, but we're fully recognizing the challenges that are there.
Just to follow up, you've mentioned the headwinds from Europe repeatedly for many, many months. You mentioned them again today. Do you feel like over the last few weeks there has been some progress or possibility of progress made on reducing those headwinds?
Well, there has been progress without question. The actions of the ECB are important, very important. There's been continued progress on some of the reforms in the major economies in Europe. There are other challenges in some of the peripheral economies that have become a little more acute in recent weeks as well. But the situation, as we say, is contained but remains acute. And I would always distinguish in Europe between measures which create the opportunity create a time period for the underlying adjustments to take place, and the underlying adjustments. And we very much welcome important measures, including those of the signaled by the ECB Governing Council a few weeks ago. Those are very important. But the ECB doesn't expect, nor do we expect, nor should anybody in Europe expect that they are the solution to the challenges that Europe faces. They make the solution possible, but they aren't the solution.
So given some of the soft data that you just mentioned...
Sorry, could you just state your name, please?
Sorry, Alison Martel. I'm here from Reuters.
Okay.
So given some of the soft data and the challenges that you just mentioned, do you think it still makes sense to talk about possibly withdrawing monetary stimulus?
Well, obviously I do, because I did. There's a few factors here. One is the relatively modest level of the output gap. Secondly, the evolution of the Canadian housing market. We're starting from a position of near record activity, certainly as a proportion of GDP, and the challenges that are in household debt. Measures have been taken, so-called macroprudential measures have been taken, but we need to see how well those are flowing through to the economy and achieving a softer landing in that sector as well. We also have to look through shorter-term wiggles in the data. And the last thing, which is relevant, is that rates are very, very low. Rates are very low, and rates are lower here than they are in any other non-crisis economy. So stimulus is considerable in Canada.
Mm-hmm. So,
and by the way, the last thing, obviously, just I don't want to admit the persistent strength of the Canadian dollar, which is fine. We have many things to take into account when we judge it. But
I was just about to ask about that.
But on balance, we are where I said we were in the speech.
So you said during the speech, I believe 20% of the export gap is due to the Canadian dollar, but I mean, that's not nothing. So how do you respond to some of the pleas that you're getting from labor leaders to address the Canadian dollar?
Well, we take the currency into account in the setting of monetary policy. It's a very important relative price. It is one of the headwinds. We have signaled persistently, we've signaled about the persistent strength of the Canadian dollar and the challenges that brings to our economy. It has consequences for the stance of policy in this country. So, but what I was trying to say, and I don't think anybody would disagree, that the dollar is not the sole answer to our challenges on the export side. The structural orientation of our economy, unfortunately, is too north-south, not enough east-west in a global sense, and that's going to take a while to change. And there's no sense pretending that that's not the case.
Elizabeth St. Philip, CTV National News. Can you elaborate on your comments about devaluing ourselves to prosperity?
Okay. Well, it's a bit of a similar point, which is that we have a challenge on the export side. I mean, one of the elements, I'll give you another fact, which is that our share of global manufacturing exports or goods exports, our market share globally has been cut in half from over the last decade, from about 4.5% to just about 2.25%. And why is that the case? It's only about, in our analysis, only about a fifth of that can be explained by the marked move in the currency. Other factors are relative productivity performance, which hasn't been strong enough. And then this basic point of where we're trying to sell. We're selling to the places where exports aren't growing, i.e. the U.S., as opposed to where they are. And so we need that reorientation. And so the point is that if there were a dramatic shift in the currency, one would not expect us to achieve as much as some might think.
And people who persist in saying that the lower loonie would help boost their businesses, I know that sort of answers.
Well, I mean, that's what follows through, which is that look, we pay attention to the level of the currency. It has implications for the stance of policy. We look at policy ultimately from an inflation targeting to achieve the inflation target, but we do take this very much into account. We're trying to do as detailed a job as we can in explaining the relative importance of it in a medium longer term perspective, and in that context, again, one of the points again, what I was trying to make in the speech was that the emerging market, a trade agenda with emerging markets brings challenges, and you heard what Ken Loenza said about reciprocity, and these are very important points. But if that's where the growth is in imports, and if those are the places that are really to the center of how production is going to be organized, global value chains in the future, then the value of getting good trade deals with these countries is supreme.
We're getting down on time, so one of our wrap-up questions.
Okay.
Yep.
I'm Alexandra Pisatsky from the Canadian Press. I was wondering if you could speak to the $100 bill issue. I know you said that you're going to reform the system to approve $100 bills, and I'm wondering if you give a timeline and maybe some detail there.
Yeah. Well, thanks for the question. I mean, first let me repeat what I said on Monday, which is, just to be absolutely clear that, on behalf of the bank and personally, I apologize for the offense created by that sequence of events. And that's not the standard that Canadians expect of the bank, and steps have to be taken to ensure that there's not a repetition. First point. So your question is, what are we going to do about it? And to give you a context in terms of timelines, the way that banknote production goes, I mean, we have in effect produced the vast majority of the $100 notes. Most of those are in circulation. Something on the order of 150 million notes are now in circulation of those $100. And we, the planning for the next phase really kicks off in 2014. So we have a good, proper window between now and then to do a proper review process of how we capture the diversity of this country in the design and distribution of banknotes. And what we're going to do is to consult with a broad range of stakeholders on that, get input, and also reflect on how this is addressed in similar situations, other jurisdictions.
Thank you.
Time for maybe one more quick one.
Marie-Ève Cousineau, Radio-Canada. Que pouvez-vous faire et qu'allez-vous faire pour aider le secteur manufacturier?
La Banque du Canada, une discours? Non, ce n'est pas suffi. Premièrement, mais c'est une petite blague, très petit, mais au moins, la banque peut essayer d'expliquer la situation mondiale et les défis pour l'économie canadienne. Comme nous avons discuté, nous venons de discuter, il y a un problème structurel avec l'orientation de l'économie canadienne. C'est une orientation nord-sud, pas est-ouest, en effet. Il faut le changer. Il y a des conséquences de ça en ce qui concerne, y compris les accords de libre-échange avec les marchés émergents. Alors, on peut expliquer la situation, premièrement. Deuxièmement, il faut que la banque travaille dans une étroite collaboration avec le bureau surintendant des institutions financières et le gouvernement fédéral afin d'avoir un système financier résilient et compétitif ici au Canada. C'est absolument important parce qu'il va être important pendant une période de volatilité que les firmes manufacturières pourraient avoir l'accès au crédit tout le temps et n'importe quelle circonstance. Et troisièmement, dans le contexte d'un cadre de politique monétaire du ciblage de l'inflation. Il faut la banque doit incorporer le niveau et la volatilité de notre devise. Alors.
And final question.
Et si on peut poursuivre en français, Yannick Dumont-Baron de Radio-Canada.
Bon.
Le secteur manufacturier, c'est une chose. Le secteur automobile est peut-être particulier. Il est très intégré avec les États-Unis.
Ouais.
Est-ce qu'il y a autre chose à faire? Diversifier les exportations quand on vend du bois, c'est facile peut-être. Mais quand on vend des voitures, est-ce qu'il y a d'autres choses que les travailleurs de l'auto peuvent faire, sinon demander que le dollar soit plus bas?
Oui, il faut reconnaître que les travailleurs dans le secteur d'automobile, par exemple, ils font d'autres choses. Par exemple, c'est absolument nécessaire d'avoir la recherche et le développement dans la chaîne de production. Ici, il y a des aspects ici de secteur d'automobile très importants, c'est-à-dire les suppliers de niveau 1.
Les fournisseurs.
Les fournisseurs, merci. Les fournisseurs de niveau 1. Et il y a des sociétés qui mettent à peu près un peu moins de $1 milliard pendant une décennie, d'ici 2016, $1 milliard de recherche, de développement, afin d'augmenter la compétitivité des fournisseurs, ici au Canada. Et c'est un partenariat entre le gouvernement, des universités, une des grandes sociétés américaines, et les travailleurs. Alors, il faut augmenter la recherche et le développement. Le point final, c'est plus difficile. Comme j'ai dit, comme j'ai mentionné dans le discours, les chances commerciales dans le secteur manufacturier changent. La manière change. C'est plus une question d'étapes de production, pas de production dans l'ensemble. Et il faut réfléchir à quelle étape a le Canada la compétitivité. Comment on peut agrandir la compétitivité dans quelques étapes. Et dans le secteur aérospatial, par exemple, nous avons une compétitivité accrue dans quelques aspects et par conséquent, et quelques aspects, et ils sont des aspects de haute valeur, the design and the engineering in aerospace. So, c'est simplement un des exemples. Merci.
Okay. Thank you very much. Merci beaucoup. Okay.